So we'll go ahead and get started with our, presentation. There we go. Okay, so first I want to tell you a little bit about Aringo and how we work. So we help clients on a daily basis, every year, every cycle, every round, with helping with their MBA applications, master's applications, mostly in the graduate arena, but we can help with anything. But we help you with the chances estimation, figuring out the strategy of what you want to do to be able to best present yourself to admissions committees. We help with essay writing. You still do the actual writing itself, but we're here to help you along the way, help you with letters of recommendation, interview prep, anything that goes into an application, we're here to help you with. And Aringo has been around for about 20 years, and we've helped over 4,000 applicants get accepted into top MBA programs around the globe. And so you can see our statistics on our website, but here's a quick glance. And again, today I'm joined by Shiram Mani. Shiram is one of our top-rated MBA admissions consultants. He is an MIT grad. He is also a former member of the ambassador team for MIT, and he is the founder of Indian Raga, which is an amazing organization that actually is all about storytelling. So Shiram, tell us a little bit more about you and what kind of makes you excited about helping candidates with their applications.
Yeah, I think my whole life has pretty much been about storytelling, and I share a deep passion for bringing out really unique stories. I think everybody has a unique story, and it just takes some time to bring it out, and there's a lot of techniques to develop that. I started my company, Indian Raga, while I was a student at Sloan, and pretty much like you said, what we do in that is storytelling through music, dance, and performing arts. And then in my own case, I think I did about 73 to 75 drafts of my cover letter for MIT, probably more, and really refined through that whole process, what really matters. And then when I came to the States and joined school and spoke to a lot of people, and also was part of the campus ambassador team, I realized that, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what admissions teams are really looking for. And so I started helping a few friends first with their applications for the next season. And almost every single person got into all their top programs. And they were like, dude, you should do this, professionally. So that's when I decided to approach Aringo, and the rest, as they say, is history. I think the thing I enjoy most is, everyone has a resume, and they have a certain set of skills listed or certain set of achievements, but really digging into their personal profiles, their motivations. And as you can see, some of the top schools, their questions are also framed in a way where they clearly want to learn more about you than just the resume. And so that's really what I focus on, to understand and bring out the persona of the candidate from behind the resume. And I think I'm really excited, especially about today, because not a lot of people realize that all these documents have to work together. You obviously get asked a lot, well, what about my GMAT score? Or is my resume good enough? It's not just about that. It's about how it is in conjunction with all of the other materials. So yeah, happy to dive into that and, talk more about what I do.
Excellent. Thanks, Shiram. And just, he's a little bit humble, but his statistics and his ability to help with candidates getting scholarships is tremendous. His stats are on his profile on our website, so you can you can check those out and see a little bit more about Shiram and his success with his clients. So, all right. So real quick about how we're going to go through today. So first, we're going to talk about the different program options that you have, their rankings, the process for MBA applications, the deadlines, the MBA resume, the essays, recommendation letters, and putting it all together. So just to give us a little bit of basis for this presentation, I wanted to kind of address what type of people are looking for an MBA and kind of defining who you are. So determining if you're kind of a career switcher, or if you're deciding to accelerate and be able to kind of jump the line and get, beyond just a manager role, maybe moving into the director role. That is another option for this. Or maybe you're deciding to be like Shiram and be an entrepreneur. Or I like this. I've seen it a couple of times. Maybe it's time to take a little bit of a break. A lot of the times people will be out of school for, 5 years and say, I'm not really sure if this is exactly what I want to do. I need to slow down and take a chance and understand a little bit more about what makes me tick and decide what I want to do next. And so an MBA is a great spot to kind of do a little bit of soul searching. Okay, so yep. So the me time. Okay, beyond that, I'll say that there's definitely primarily three different types of MBA programs. One is the full-time MBA program. That's for mostly candidates who are 5 to 7 years out of undergrad, and they're wanting to do a fully immersed 1 or 2 year program where they're taking time out of the workforce and really concentrating on that next step in their career. If you're maybe 8, 10, 12 years out of undergrad and really feel like you're established professionally, but you're looking to get to the next level, or maybe it is part of the requirements to get to the next level, an executive MBA can also be a great option. And then let's say maybe you're kind of around that like 7 to 10 years of work experience, not really in the mode for like a traditional full-time MBA program, but you know that you need to kind of get to that next level. There are some 1-year senior MBA programs like the MSX program at Stanford, the MIT Sloan Fellows program, the Global EMBA program at Foster. So a lot of options in that arena as well. So a couple of things about how you choose which program to go into. And again, this kind of will feed into this putting your application together, is, deciding where you want to be will be the biggest, one of the bigger parts is where do you want to be in your career, and how will you be best served as far as like looking at employment opportunities post MBA, and then also where you want to live. You can also look at the location, school rankings, and the cost of the program. But the other things that I really highly recommend for people to explore is the school's specialties, or concentrations or areas of interest, depending on what the school calls them. Who's going to be recruiting there, as far as like which companies are you wanting to work at, and then the types of teaching methods. I would say that right now most schools are really focused on experiential learning because that's kind of where the crowd is instead of theoretical, or a hybrid of the two. And the other thing to consider is the class size and culture. So you could go to school in New York and be immersed in a giant city, or you could be in Ithaca at Cornell, and in a really small campus town where you're really kind of really going to get to know your classmates through that entire process. Or maybe like Shiram, you're going to be in Boston, where it's a nice hybrid of both of those.
And I think, I know the segment that's at the bottom, it says, but you should also look at. But personally, if you ask me, and like from, all the experience I've had, that is probably the most important, because quite often candidates don't realize that they can get admitted to multiple programs. And really what they pick, I personally believe, should not just be about scholarships and finances and stuff like that, but really the school culture, like, what do they specialize in, and what can you get out of that, especially from a brand and networking perspective, because that's really one of the biggest value drivers of an MBA. In fact, I personally last year, I had someone who had like $100,000 scholarship to another top program, but I encouraged the person to take a better ranked brand, even with less scholarship or almost a zero scholarship, simply because their personality fitted best. And he just had a phenomenal time, and still thanks me for that decision. So that's something I'm also happy to talk about, but we should also keep in mind as we think about MBA programs and fit.
Agreed. All right. So again, very quickly, a little bit about the MBA process. You'll complete the online application. You'll be working on the first selection for interviews. You get your interview decision. Then after that, you will do the interview, and then the committee will come out with their decision, and you'll hopefully be offered a spot. So essentially, the way we like to do it is a lot of work, then waiting, a lot of work, waiting, and then hopefully a decision within about 2 to 3 months of actually submitting your application. And then deadlines typically for round one, they're September to October. Round two is typically around January, and round three is March, April time period. Some of those can vary depending on the school and their time. As far as some might have like a November deadline, just depending on the school. HEC Paris has a deadline almost every month. So, each school is a little bit different for themselves. So that's a little bit about the application process. And now I'll let Shiram kind of dive into the different components of the application and how we'll tie them all together.
All right. So this, I think, is my most favorite slide in the entire presentation, because it really is something that all of you should keep in mind, that what you're sending to them is a puzzle that has different pieces that have to fit together. And we'll go in more detail about each one, but very quickly, your resume is essentially a very quick snapshot of your strongest accomplishments. And it's just a quick look at who you are. The resume is not the be all end all, but it is the most important document because that's the thing that they watch first. And then that has to complement or enhance the essays, or rather the essays have to sort of, reflect the same tone, and they go into a little bit more detail about your persona, what kind of a person or what kind of skills led to those achievements that you're seeing in the resume. So that's how the essays sort of need to make them think, oh, great, like these are the skills, or this is the kind of person this candidate is. And no wonder they have all of these fantastic achievements on the resume, right? And then the GMAT, GRE, and your transcripts are a snapshot of your academic accomplishments. And that's important because oftentimes you're applying after a few years of work experience, and your ability to continue to stay analytical or continue to be great at language and communication, they would love to see that, and how that has either evolved, stayed the same, hopefully not declined. And so that's where the transcripts are like, okay, during undergrad, during a very rigorous, demanding program, this person was able to stay on top of their academic achievements. And then they have continued to remain analytical, great at communication, as reflected through the GMAT and GRE. And so, which is why if these are not speaking the same language, then I often recommend that clients write an optional essay explaining scores or explaining, any ambiguity in the performance academically. Because the thing with an MBA is that you are going to have a very demanding academic program, but you have to be able to manage that along with all of the other good stuff, the networking and the recruiting, and just, being able to deal with your learning teams and all of that. So that's the role that those play. And then all of this has to be endorsed by the letters of recommendation. So the recommend, because you can obviously say whatever you want about yourself, but it really has to also be echoed in a very supportive and engaged fashion by your recommender, saying that yes, this person is a great leader like he claims, or they are analytically really smart and capable. But the letters of recommendation also serve to aid you when you have any gaps. So if you are coming from a work profile where you don't manage people directly, then your letters of recommendation can reflect your strong leadership abilities. Or if you are doing something where you probably have not had a chance to work with people from different cultures, then the recommender is somebody who you can approach to say, hey, can you talk about a time, when you saw me display, cultural awareness, or display, a sense of inclusivity and diversity. So the recommendations serve a dual purpose. They serve both to enhance your existing skills, but they also serve to bridge any skill gaps or other concerns that might be apparent. And that's where that becomes a very deliberate strategy. And I don't usually recommend that my clients start with drafting those or working with the recommender from day one. You get a sense of like how your essays and resume are shaping up, and then you go and attack the LORs with that strategic lens. Then you have the interviews, and in some cases, schools also ask for videos, because obviously in the age of ChatGPT, they would love to see the actual person and how they speak, and if they reflect the same person that they're seeing on paper. And so these pre-interview videos that some schools have, sorry, the application videos like Kellogg and some of them already have, or the optional video that Sloan has, they are looking for a sense of how you come across, how eloquent you are, and what they're seeing. And obviously, the interview stage is super critical to establish cultural fit, because they like what they see on paper, and now they want to get to see if you will fit into the class. And that is a very strong term, fitting into the class and the culture, that is not spoken about a lot. So I'm happy to take questions and spend some more time later on in this talk. But it is, in my opinion, something that should not be ignored and should be obvious from day one in your materials. And then the miscellaneous would be, if you're sending in any additional letters of support, or if you are, explaining anything in your optional essay, if you have schools have any other requirement like the org chart that Sloan has about like your hierarchy. So then there's additional components based on the school that would be important to consider. So that to me is the entire picture that they get to see, which is your story. And in short, you have to be able to tell them essentially that here's all of the things I've done since childhood. This is what drives me. This is who I am. And this is what I've achieved so far. Now, in future, in life, this is the problem or the dream that I want to devote myself to. And hence, my next professional step, which is my short-term goal, is what is going to get me to that long-term goal. And hence, to bridge that divide, I need your program, and it is the perfect program for me to get from here to here. So that in a snapshot is what your story needs to look like, and these materials are going to give you, the ability to put that forward, if that makes sense. And I'm seeing a comment here from GMAT Club that we are monitoring the chat window. Yeah, I mean, if you have questions, please post them here. We're happy to take questions as we go. But yeah, Jen, I think we can go to the next slide, unless you want to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, the one thing that I've heard time and time again from admissions committees is that they're curating a class. And so being able to get to know you and hear your story is really how they're going to decide if you're going to be a good fit for this upcoming class and cohort that's starting. So being able to, kind of show what you've done personally is really helpful for the committee to decide, like, hey, look, during the pandemic, he was able to do X, Y, and Z compared to maybe some other students that weren't, or just something amazing that they feel like could really help with the class getting to know more. So this is exactly what they're looking for. I do see that we have one comment real quick, Shiram, before we go to the next slide. Hearing all this is so scary. I start judging myself based on my average academics, and it's keeping me back. Can't help but rely on high GMAT score and WorkX.
Right.
Yeah.
God, there's no reason to be scared at all. I think the point of all of this is that you have all these materials to tell your story and to bridge your gaps. So average academics is something that we work with all the time. I think a whole bunch of my clients are actually closer to a 3 GPA on 4 than, those 3.8, 3.9 4s. And I think that's where you can definitely think about a high GMAT score if you can. Or think about the fact that there are so many people in the world today who are not great test takers. I mean, they have demonstrated great ability to work with numbers and do some of the most complex, challenging projects at work. But then when you look at their scores, they don't have great scores. So that's where the optional essay comes in hand, to be able to explain that, I'm not the greatest test taker. And hence, I would love for the admissions committee to look at my profile and my abilities based on my my professional accomplishments. And then you list out a few in which you've done very well with analytical rigor, and then maybe a few in which you've done something that needed a lot of communication, negotiation, and presentation. And so that's how you bridge that gap. So please don't be scared through this whole process of learning about this. It's a very enjoyable, really fun process. And trust me, ever since I've completed this process for my own MBA application, everything else in life has become really simple. Because, when I was applying for jobs after that, internships, when I was starting my company, being able to tell your story and inspire people to invest in you just becomes that much simpler. So enjoy the process. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Excellent. And then Anjani has another question about the interview process, and we'll get back. We'll
Yeah.
make it to an in-depth slide just on that. So we'll make sure we get back to you on that question. And then I'll go ahead and go to the next slide and let you get started talking about the MBA resume.
Yeah. So the one thing that I see commonly people making a mistake is their MBA resume looks like the resume they would give to a job recruiter in their industry. And it's very important to understand that they're not the same. When you're sending your resume to somebody who's going to recruit you for a job in your field of specialization, your terminology can be very specific to your industry, and you can basically focus a lot more on, the skills needed in your industry. But when you're applying to an MBA, you have to show a well-rounded personality and be able to break down all the things about your job in simpler language so the admissions committee can understand without any background. So, for instance, you do not need a summary in an MBA resume. And everything needs to start with, good company descriptions, which means, even if it's Google or Facebook or with, an unknown company, a one-line description that talks about like what's impressive about that company or something worth knowing. So they get a sense for, okay, this is where you fit into this kind of a company. Impressive responsibilities, by which I mean, if you're leading teams, even if they're not directly reporting to you, but like how big is the group of people that you're managing or interacting with? What kind of like problems have you solved? What kind of insights have you generated? The ability to highlight any honors or awards. A lot of people have, early promotions, for example, and they've been given the early promotion for demonstrating a certain skill. So it's a lost opportunity if you're not able to convey that through a resume. And then all of these have to also connect to your goals. So when I see somebody who's potentially in, say, marketing, and then they have this like leadership quality to them, they've been able to work with data and social media analytics and do something really great, and then be able to present these results to high senior executives. And then after the MBA, they want to get into strategy. I should be able to clearly see through their previous accomplishments, oh, that this person would be perfect for a strategy role because they are showing me the qualities that they have to get into a strategy role. Now, if your marketing resume, I mean, if you're from marketing before and want to get into strategy later, does not have anything about leadership, about like strategic analysis, about like presenting to people, and all it has is just brand positioning and social media and analytics and stuff like that, then I cannot make that connection pre MBA and post MBA. So it's really important that when you look at your resume, because remember that you get into business school and within the first 2 months you're going to start interviewing for your internships even before you actively dig into any courses. So that's why it has to already start looking like a resume that can get you your internship or a short term post MBA job. Um, the other most important thing is avoid stating only positions or job descriptions in your CV. And that I think is the single biggest mistake if I have to put my finger on it. Everyone tends to talk about what you're supposed to do in your job. The MBA admissions committee does not care about that. They only care about what you accomplished in your job. And the difference between what you're supposed to do and what you're accomplished is achieved through numbers. So instead of saying, in my role as product manager, I oversee X, Y, and Z, that's a job description, which means you were supposed to do all of that. We want to know how well you did that. So then you have to say, in my product manager role, I achieved 25% increase in profit margins by doing X and Y, or I brought in 5 more clients using a certain negotiation strategy. So everything on the resume, every single bullet without fail has to be an accomplishment bullet, not a description bullet. um, there's an example here which is more about everything that I'm talking about, like the numbers, using words like leading, analyzing, championing, spearheading, managing, designing, conceptualizing. These are powerful action verbs that are important to have instead of associating with part of, working on or supporting someone else, collaborating with. Those are weaker words. So I think it's important to really showcase a range of your accomplishments in the resume, if that makes sense. And the number one thing they want to see is when you're in an academic program in your undergrad, it's great. If you have great GPA, talk about it. If you've done some special projects, exchange programs, all of that, mention that. But have you done student-led activities? Have you been responsible for leading any clubs? Have you taken the time to pursue your hobbies? That is extremely important because an MBA is not just about sitting in a class and, studying. So you have to be able to manage both. And you show that by showing them that you've done it before. And hence you can do it again. So that's why the education section in an MBA resume is extremely important. The other big mistake people make is in the education section, they'll put their GPA and their academic awards, and all of the student activities, they put in like community activities. But no one has the time to, look at the community activities and be like, oh, he did this or he or she did this in that section. They don't have the time. Make it easy for them. Put everything in one section so it's all there to show that, okay, in my undergrad, I was great academically. These are all the things I did. And by the way, I was also head of like XYZ club, right? So that's really important to showcase. And your extracurriculars are because you have to be a fun person. Like in the MBA program, you're going to be working in teams all the time, like in a small level with your student groups or, on assignments, to being participating in class, to organizing stuff in student clubs and everything. So the more interesting skills you have and the more colorful a person you are, the better, you're going to be. So I think the last section, the additional interests or extracurricular activities, can really supplement and make them have a great sense of, okay, this person has great professional accomplishments, but he or she is also so interesting that, people will really enjoy having them in class. And I think that, and the other big mistake people make there is just like a laundry list. Interests, reading, hiking, running, that's boring. You have to be specific about what it is. What are you reading nowadays? What kind of books do you like reading? What do you feel about a certain book? Hiking, have you done hikes in like a really interesting part of town? What do you do when you hike usually? Do you prefer like easy trails and moderate trails or hard trails? Do you prefer doing it in nature? Do you prefer doing it in like artificial places? Anything. So tell us something more about it, because in the interview, they might potentially use that as an icebreaker to talk about it. And that's a great way to sort of connect, especially if there are second year students who are doing the interviews. That's even more fun. Or even with regular adcoms, like it's great to show that you have personality behind all of those accomplishments.
Excellent. So Shiram, I have a couple of questions. So,
sure.
And Johnny wanted to know about, how much importance is given to the institution or the company that you've worked for, if it's not necessarily an MNC or a top ranked university. Any comments on that?
Yeah, there is no difference between you working for Google versus any other company. It's just about like how much responsibility have you had, what kind of accomplishments have you been able to demonstrate, and how far you've taken the company. And then your recommenders can continue to echo that. So, that's the reason, like, especially when I was in the Sloan program, like, for a lot of my classmates, I'd never even heard the names of their companies before. So I don't think it really matters at all which company you are at. And, it's just the way you position what you've done. And if that seems to be, impressive.
Agreed. I have a lot of candidates that prior to our conversation didn't think that it was relevant to share like working in a family business, but I mean, it's a tremendous upside for the MBA admissions committee to see that. They love family business. And in fact, many of them have family business centers.
Absolutely, they do. It's on the rise. And also, if you have been working in a family business, it obviously means that, growing up, maybe a lot of your dinner table conversations were about strategy, or maybe they were about accounting, or you've probably seen something, from being in a family business that gives you the ability to think about what it feels like to be in the shoes of a CEO that might be valuable to share in the MBA classroom. So you should not hesitate to put anything that adds a dimension to your personality. I mean, and if you're working with a consultant, they can advise you better also. But like, it's my job to tell you if something doesn't make sense or doesn't fit in the resume. But don't ignore or avoid these already before you've even tried, right? So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then I had another question from S, and they want to know about if your GMAT score is below 600, but you have really strong experiences. How do you leverage that best?
So you leverage that by showcasing all of the great things you did as a leader. And if during that time when you were leading your club or volunteering for the NGO, if you had to take some really challenging and complicated decisions that involved numbers, that involved like, picking between difficult choices, that involved making sense of like multiple different trends, showcase that you've done all of those things because you are somebody who clearly can do great things practically, maybe are just not great at taking tests hypothetically. And then being able to showcase that should, I mean, obviously, there are some schools that like outright use the GMAT score to, shortlist a set of candidates. In that case, it's going to be hard. But, in most other cases, I think it should work to be able to tell them, let's give them a shot.
Excellent. And then there was another question, which I mean, I know that we're kind of sticking to the resume for a little bit, an extra minute, but what extracurricular activities can I add now to look better to an admissions committee? What are your insights? Because I have some thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, do you want to go first?
Sure. What I would say to anyone is to make sure if you're going to start doing any sort of extracurricular, technically for the MBA application, is to make it not seem like that because they can really pick up on it. And so the best way to do it is to tie it to anything that you've done before. So if you volunteered or were part of a specific club during your academics or even before, you can also join similar types of clubs or organizations, now as a professional or getting involved at work. So a lot of work companies have, different CSR community service related events or things like that. And so you can get involved there. So it doesn't seem so random that the committee is like, yeah, you did that just for this application.
Yeah, my thoughts. I mean, I definitely agree with everything you're saying. I would also say that, like, this is the number one place to avoid misconceptions. When I was applying, everybody in India was like, oh, if you do something with an NGO, then you get, work with a corporate 2 years and then work with an NGO and then you get into the top programs. No, that's not how this works at all. The more exotic, unique, rare your extracurriculars, the better, in my opinion. And I've had clients right from who were designing automated robotic race cars. And for some reason, they thought that was not cool enough. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Two people who do, the tie and dye, like Bandhani, the tie and dye sort of, work with apparel, to picking up someone recently was learning all of her Italian grandmother's recipes and being able to sort of like bring it into the modern world and document them and learn how to cook them. These are heartwarming stories that just show who you are and what you enjoy doing. I would not hesitate from any and all of those. Now, if you do have extracurriculars where you are leading, in the sense of like you're hosting board games night, or you are hosting the local soccer leagues, or you're organizing, poker games, where like, you're working with a group of people and leading that, that could add to the leadership credentials on your overall profile. But then even if you do something that's more solitary, like you're probably a Sudoku champion, those things are fine as well. Because remember that, especially in today's day and age, there is equal emphasis on being a leader, being outgoing, but at the same time also being thoughtful, reflective, and having great mental health and being able to deal with being by yourself. So having any and all of those is absolutely fine. When you write something and you see it, or your friends see it, or your consultant sees it, they can easily tell if you're just making something up or if it is straight from your heart and if it reflects who you are. I would go towards being genuine and something that reflects who you are and, gives you that spark in your profile, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Thanks, Shiram. Okay, so just make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the GMAT channel while we switch to our next topic of the essays.
The essays. All right. So I think this one tip is going to be like half of your essays. When they ask you a question, what matters most to you and why? The first sentence in your essay should be, what matters most to me is X because ABC. Most candidates who I see, they're just like starting off with giving some kind of context and beating around the bush and going somewhere. And I'm literally painfully scanning the whole essay, being like, okay, what are they talking about? Like, what actually matters most to you? Do not make it hard for AdCom. If you're just going to give them extra work to figure out what your answer is, they're just going to be like, this is just too much work. They have to go through 10,000 applications. Please answer the question in the first sentence or the very first short opening paragraph. The American style of communication, which they actually teach you in business school, is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, which might seem like you're emphasizing the same thing over and over again, but it's not. The number of essays where I've literally gone through the whole thing and just sent it right back within 2 minutes saying that nowhere in the essay have you answered the question is like hundreds. So please make sure you're answering the question, preferably right at the top. And the kind of clarity that it gives even you to write is just phenomenal. Like all I tell my clients is that, okay, just answer this to me first in one sentence. And after that, everything is clear. They just like run off and they're able to start generating big drafts by themselves. Word limit, I do not see why somebody at like an MBA level should ever have to exceed word limit. I just do not recommend it. And yes, you'll find all kinds of information that some schools are okay, some schools are not. I just think it is sloppy work. Like, please, you're taking the time to work on these. Do not ever exceed word limit. I just do not ever recommend it. Promote your candidacy. By what that means is they are asking the same question to everybody. But your answer can really do a great job of selling yourself if, along with answering the question, it can also place the right emphasis on your unique skill sets. So if the question is about like leadership, but you're somebody who is very good at, working with numbers, you're highly analytical, super smart, then yes, of course, talk about the leadership, but make sure to include how your ability to work with numbers and figures and facts and trends gave you the extra ability as a leader. Maybe you're the kind of leader. So there are different leaders, right? Like some people just like tell really inspiring stories and then motivate a group of people. And then there are some leaders who are able to bring powerful, facts and statistics and numbers and put their point across to get people to do what they do. So here's a chance to showcase like what kind of a leader you are. And so make sure to promote your candidacy, which usually happens after you've done one or two drafts, and then you look at it again, and then you say, okay, now how can I make this about myself? Include the research you've done about INSEAD or any of the schools, which is the exact kind of electives that you're going to take, the student clubs that you will lead, the kind of action labs at Sloan that you might go for, or, at one of the conferences, maybe there is a very unique panel that you'd like to lead. Like, what would that be? Be extremely specific so that way they know that you've done your research on the school and you're crafting it for that school instead of, just like submitting the same thing to everyone. Let them know how you can contribute to their community, because business schools are essentially, I'd say, there's a bunch of resources the school provides, but a lot of using that is on the students. It's all very student driven. So if there is a marketing club, then say that you'd like to be the president of the marketing club and be able to organize. Like I had a client who's working in skincare meets healthcare. And so it's a unique way to showcase that like you'll work with the marketing or the retail club rather, and then have like a healthcare angle where you'll organize company visits to companies that are operating at the boundary of like cosmetic innovation, but with a view on healthcare. And that really makes you come across as someone who's really unique. I, for example, came in and organized a panel at the MBA Media Entertainment Conference on live entertainment, because I came from the world of live entertainment. And I actually ended up doing that, and it was supremely successful. We got people from Cirque du Soleil, Disney Theatrical Group, and it was so unique and refreshing that it had not been done as often before. So make sure that you're able to showcase what you can contribute uniquely to the community based on what you do. What kind of person you are is as important as your career trajectory. And what we mean by that is the kind of person you are could be someone who loves going the extra mile. Like in everything you do, you love sort of like doing a little bit extra, versus somebody who is sort of very 80-20. Like, they don't try to boil the ocean. They just like stay very focused on the things that have the most impact. And both are going to be successful. I think it's just a function of them knowing which of these you are, or like other personalities. Some people are just like very empathetic. That's how they work, right? Like they're able to motivate people, get into their stories, all of that. And then there are some people who are just very much about, telling big picture stories. So there's like all these different personas, but being able to give them who you are, I think, is half the battle won. And always be specific. In my opinion, you should just never use words like numerous, several, lots of, multiple, because they mean nothing. You have to say, instead of like, I've done numerous projects across multiple sectors, say, I have done 7 of my company's most revenue generating projects across 6 different industry sectors. That sounds way more powerful and believable than just using these like vague numbers. And anyone who says, I don't know how to quantify, is just being lazy, in my opinion. Like, you should be able to give a ballpark number and be able to give some kind of an indication of like, how big the impact of your work was. So that's my big picture stuff on the essays. And especially because the essays, again, coming back to how it fits into the overall, persona, the essays are the place to actually show your personality, because the resume is too succinct. You can't say too much about all of the things I told you here, because that's just more like a snapshot. But the essays really are the place where they can start imagining and visualizing you as a person. And so the role that the essays play is to literally give them an image of you in reality, like operating the way you do. And so if you're able to get that done, then the essays part of it is covered.
Excellent. I love it. I think that it's absolutely true to be able to see, give more color to what you're sharing with the admissions committee. That's what they love to see.
Career goals. I think I might have covered this a little bit previously, so I'll be a little fast on this. A short-term goal has to be extremely specific. In the short term, I would like to be a product manager at a multinational tech company like Google, Amazon, or Facebook. That's an example of a clear short-term goal. A wrong example of a short-term goal is, in the short term post MBA, I would like to focus on a role where I can collaborate with different teams to be able to build the next wave of technological innovation. That means nothing. So it has to be extremely specific. What's the designation? What is the role? What kind of a company? Give me 2, 3 examples, right? The long-term goal, on the other hand, should not be too specific. If you say your long-term goal is to start a company that is going to use AI to personalize recommendations for medtech devices to cure diabetes, they'll just be like, do it right now. You already know what you want to do. Why do you want to spend so much time and money? So a long-term goal has to be a dream or a problem that you want to solve that is so big and so ambitious that you need these next 10 years to be able to get there. Right? So which is why just saying in the long term, I want to be the CEO of a tech consulting firm doesn't really help as much. I mean, you might get lucky, but my recommendation would be to focus on the problem you want to solve. In the long term, I want to solve the problem of building a sustainable business model for the energy crisis, or for wind energy. Or I want to focus on leveraging AI to personalize recommendations for preventive healthcare. Now that is like nebulous and like high level enough that it makes sense for you to go through all of that, right? And then when they ask you questions like this, usually there'll be a little bit more room for space. I would recommend focusing more on what about your personality and what about your skills can enable those goals, or what your passion is for them, instead of just relying on what happened in the past. So the automatic tendency is to go and say, oh, this is what I did in the past. And that's usually not going to make as much sense as it is about staying on your goals and talking about like what motivates you. Is there a personal angle to it? Is there something unique about your, your skills so far that make you the right person to do it? So that's my recommendation on this.
Excellent. All right, moving on to my favorite type of essays. The failure essay is actually my favorite.
Yeah, so the role that the failure essay plays, although, usually the failure essay is more in the recommendation letter. They usually ask the recommender, what kind of constructive feedback have you given the candidate and how did they learn from it? Sometimes the essays themselves will have it. And the idea here is that business schools do believe that the greater your failure, the greater your learning. And so a lot of candidates start the failure essay by saying that I have done something so well so far, and this like one time I just did something slightly wrong, and then I suddenly became great and it was all back to normal. Don't try to hide behind that. They don't like that. If you can say that I ended up like micromanaging my team and I was not able to see the big picture, and as a result, we lost a $5 million client, that is way more powerful and meaningful than just like, oh, I made like a small mistake in an Excel sheet and like, my partner caught it and everything is fine. So I think you really have to own and show that you've had enough of a challenging career that you did fail. Because if you did not fail, that means you've just like taken it easy and there's not really been too much of a challenge in your profile. That's all I have to say on this, but Jen, you're free to expand more on that.
No, I love that it's different from the typical like job interview perspective of, oh, I don't want to share anything negative, because I think the biggest thing about any MBA program is how you deal with the adversity. What do you do and what happens next is really the biggest thing that an admissions committee wants to hear is how do you take a setback and make it work for you. And I think that that also leads into, if you have a low GPA or things like that, or you have gaps in your employment, those are other opportunities to show I've grown and I've learned from, my mistake or setback.
Right.
Awesome. Any more on this slide, Shiram?
No, I think I'm good with this one.
Excellent. All right, recommendation letters.
Recommendation letters. So the like I said before, the recommendation letters in the application serve the dual purpose of endorsing your skills from a more credible source and bridging your weaknesses. So ideally, your recommendation, and almost everyone asks me if it should be someone who's like senior up or if it should be someone famous. Yes, if it is Barack Obama, sure, that'll be fantastic. But if it is not, then it must be your immediate direct supervisor. It does not matter if they did an MBA themselves. It does not matter if they are, super senior in the organization. It has to be somebody who worked closely enough with you that they can comment very credibly on your skills and your weaknesses, and they should have been in a position to be able to fire you. That I think is really important in your choice of recommenders. And then schools usually, which qualities each one will emphasize. Leadership is something that usually ends up being in common, but then you also have, should they highlight your analytical skill? Should they highlight your creativity? Should they highlight your entrepreneurial capability? Should they highlight your empathy? Or should they highlight your ability to be a diverse and inclusive leader? That really depends upon what kind of examples they have. And then, being able to really say, okay, this person is one of the most natural leaders I have ever worked with. For instance, in April 2022, when we were facing one of the biggest challenges with one of our existing clients, this person led a team of 15 to come up with this negotiation strategy and really brought this unique client back to the board to discuss, and this is what they did. Like, it has to be at that level of detail for every skill that you're highlighting. Without that, they're going to simply ignore it because it doesn't look like it's done properly. And if your recommender does not have prior experience in writing such detailed, dramatic letters, then you can offer to send them bullet points or just like, talk to them and give them some stories to remind them. But it has to be at that level of detail. If not, I think it has happened to some of my clients in the past where the recommendation probably was not the strongest thing in their profile and they didn't make it to the topmost programs that they could have, and then the next year when they tried with different set of recommenders, they made it, so sometimes it just makes all the difference.
Right. I think that one of the biggest pieces of advice I've ever heard is to, invite your boss or your director or even like a past boss out to coffee and have a chat with them to ask them the favor and, buy them a cup of coffee or tea and then, go through a little bit of your background, because while they might know you for this snapshot, giving them a little bit more of a background, not a biography, but a little bit of background helps them with putting things into perspective and making sure that they are telling the full story, to say like, I know that Shiram has worked with, candidates from all over the globe, including X, Y, and Z. While he was here, he focused on the Canadian market or whatever it might be. But, being able to prep your recommender really does help.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to move on to MBA interviews, and we're still monitoring the chat box. So if you have anything else to share or questions to ask, please, submit them for us. We're almost at the end of our presentation when we'll do a Q&A, but, remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe.
Great. So the interview essentially is just to see if you fit in with the culture of the school. And how that comes across is some schools will ask you, tell me about this thing from your resume. Like you said, you achieved and brought this client on board. How did you do that? Did you face any challenges? And then you're explaining what that is. And then they might ask you, okay, how did you navigate that challenge? And then based on how you did it, that's how they know if you're a collaborative person, or if you're a very type A aggressive person, or if you're somebody who likes to use authority, or if you're somebody who likes to motivate people through stories. So it'll come across automatically anyway, because when we all talk about how we approach a certain thing, we all do it differently. So if you're not prepared, you'll just simply say exactly how you did it, which is probably not a bad thing. But if you go in with understanding what that school is looking for example, Sloan is looking for an extremely collaborative, humble environment where people own up to their failures and they learn from it. There are other schools that are just very type A aggressive, and they're just all about like what they did, how much they achieved, big numbers, big glitz, glamour, all of that stuff. So the persona that you present to the school is going to reflect whether you seem like you're going to fit into the culture of that school or not. In a way, it's good, because if you're just who you are, then you'll probably make it to the school of your choice. But I think given the fact that, you're trying to sort of make it to the topmost programs and like change your personality a little bit anyway, I think there is merit in preparing based on the culture of the school and what you think they might be looking for. And so that's where we have strategies to sort of, what kind of like skills will you focus on? What kind of stories will you take with you in your back pocket to bring up based on the question that's asked? How much research have you done on the school? So that way you can tell them, and this is why this particular elective at Kellogg makes sense for my profile. So that way they know, okay, great, like, they really understand the school. Sometimes schools are also worried that, you might make it to multiple programs and they don't know if you're going to pick their school or not. And so this is also an opportunity to show them that, no, you guys are my top choice. And that way they are convinced that you're not going to say no, if they accept you. So I think all of these strategies are what make or complete that part of your application process where they've seen you on paper. So the one thing to remember at the interview stage is, especially if it's an interview where you're invited. Some schools like Kellogg, you can also sign up for one yourself. But for the ones where you're actually shortlisted and invited, it basically means that they like what they see on paper. So you've already done a great job of showcasing your profile. Like, despite your moderate GPA or despite your not so great GMAT score or whatever else it is, they've invited you, means they would love to have you. But there are limited seats. So now within the people they like, who is going to be a better fit culture-wise? And who needs the MBA right now? I think both of those are what the interview serves as the main purpose in your candidacy, if that makes sense. Happy to take more questions on it, because everything else is now going to be specific to each person's case. So
yeah, and I would just add that with interviews, you are more than able to do your research on who you're going to be interviewing with. So if they give you an interviewer name, you can definitely look them up on LinkedIn and look at their profile. It's not a faux pas to click on their LinkedIn and be like, oh, so-and-so viewed your profile. That's totally fine. So you don't have to go incognito and try to do like some secret spy stuff. Literally, you can look at their LinkedIn profile, get to know them a little bit better, and be able to prep yourself to say, okay, like especially an alum, like being able to see their progression throughout their career and how and when they went to this specific school and then how they moved on from there. Like being able to ask them a little bit about themselves makes them feel excited because they get to, everybody likes to talk about themselves. So if you have an opportunity to ask some questions and have them share a little bit, that often helps with a little bit more of a positive feeling and hopefully a positive rating on your interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Any questions before we move on? All right. So this is our last section, or one of the last, is talking about the profile flaws. And this is kind of where Aringo really excels. We work with clients with low GPAs, low GMAT scores. So Shiram is the perfect person to be addressing this slide because he does it all the time. And it's really an amazing way to kind of see that you can get into any school or most any school, despite what you might feel like would be a tragic flaw in your background.
Yeah. I mean, something in your past, like a GPA, if it is low, it's low. You cannot go back and change it. So the best way to address something like that is to own it and just simply say, either if you have a legitimate reason to explain it, maybe some kind of a health issue or some kind of a family problem, then you explain that. But instead of just making it as an excuse, you also show what did you do after to make up for it. And usually you would have something that says, after that period of difficulty, my next semester, I was at the top of my class, or I bounced back and, like, I had like a higher GPA. And things like that are great stories, just like a movie where, like, the underdog, like, you're always rooting for that person. So, like, no one's going to blame you for it. They want to see some kind of a struggle where you were at the lowest point in your life, but then how you bounce back from it. If you don't have, a reasonable explanation for a low GPA in terms of family issues or health problems, then you can show that, you focused on a whole bunch of like student leadership or extracurricular activities to develop your personality at that point of time. And that then held you in good stead to get that investment banking job or whatever that is, and that changed the trajectory of your career. That's fine too, because you enter undergrad at an age where you're probably not the best place to decide your lifetime career. So you realize, BSc in math was probably not the best thing for you. And so you invested your time in, pivoting your career. Whatever it is, as long as it doesn't sound like an excuse, or as long as you're not blaming the program, blaming somebody else, blaming this, blaming that, but like really owning up and saying, I messed up. But then since I've done all of these amazing things, and I would love for you to judge me on those and not on my low GPA, that has usually worked wonders for me and my clients. Similarly, gaps in work history, you can talk. I literally have like a few clients last year who said, I was just feeling too stressed and I took a 6-month gap to go travel the world. And they were really worried about that. And I'm like, why? I mean, that's great. I wish more people did that. So they come back and they're not stressed at work and they actually deliver their best, because after he came back, he was just like fantastic at what he did. So things like that are absolutely fine. Like, we are thankfully in a day and age where flaws are not really flaws in the traditional sense of it. So we need to really get over that mindset and know that, it's just quirks in personality. And adcons are really open to hearing your story. That's why every single school has an optional essay prompt. So if that applies to you, absolutely use it. If that does not apply to you, do not use it. Do not give them any additional work that they have to do. Don't randomly write something for the sake of it, because they will absolutely reject you. If I'm reviewing 10,000 applications and I'm looking at an optional story, I'm like, why the hell did this person write this again? There was no need. Reject outright. Please use it optimally, but please absolutely use it if it applies to you.
Yes. And I think that another point is COVID and the pandemic has really changed or shifted maybe a lot of people's thoughts about work gaps or changes, or having worked for several different employers, or actually even like the side hustle industry. So like somebody else was asking me, is it okay if I show that I have 2 jobs at one time? And I'm like, I mean, what else could they expect, like, from an amazing candidate who is working 2 full-time jobs at one time and like made their side gig a full-time job, or that can handle that kind of work, right? Like, so it's just demonstrating things. As long as everything's positive, like you're getting strong results and you're making an impact in both jobs, I don't think there's a problem in that. But admissions committees are a lot more open-minded than they were. We are at this time like where most candidates were either graduating from undergrad during the pandemic or maybe were job searching during the pandemic. So again, they're a lot more open-minded than you might think that they are than they were 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone through all parts of the application. Hopefully we're feeling like the puzzle is coming together.
So just to reiterate, resume, snapshot of your profile. Essays will enhance and show the persona behind your personality and your achievements. GMAT, GRE, and the transcripts give you a sense of academic achievement, ability to handle, academic rigor. LOR serve to enhance and endorse your skills and bridge any skill gaps. The video gives a sense of your personality, actually how you engage, interact, and be able to see you. The interview helps dig deeper into understanding you and your fit with the school culture better. And then other miscellaneous ones to support any ancillary parts of the program, parts of the application that they want to see reinforced. That's the summary.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to Q&A. So anybody have any questions as we kind of close out today's presentation for Shiram or I about your applications and how to connect? So my email address is up here. Happy to jump on a call, or you can schedule a meeting with me or a profile evaluation if you want to chat about what you have in your background or what your story looks like. I'm definitely excited to chat with everybody about it. And so we're waiting for those questions. I just want to say thank you to Shiram. Shiram is amazing, and I love working with him, and he's fantastic. And it is round one deadline week for almost all the major schools. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to
it's what I've been talking to all my clients anyway, and like most of them are all ready to submit, and some of them already have, because tomorrow is the deadline, and it's hard to stay everything to the last minute. So we got a lot done, especially this past weekend, which is a long weekend in the States, but we had really hardworking clients.
Okay, and Johnny, can you please address the breadth versus depth in the context of interview questions? So when an admissions committee member asks you, tell me about yourself, what's your advice, Shiram?
My advice is the depth comes from being able to talk about like what's a defining theme or trait in your life. So is it a passion for a certain industry, or a passion for a certain functional area, or something that defines who you are and how you operate? So that's the depth that would make most sense to address upfront. And the breadth will come from giving them a snapshot of how many different areas you applied that to. So usually the tell me about yourself I recommend should be just 2 minutes, no more than that. And you should try to focus more on the kind of things that you want them to continue asking you about. The tell me about yourself is only asked as an icebreaker. Like they have the resume with them, they can see everything, but they just want to kind of like start getting everybody warmed up and ready to talk. So think of it less as, oh my God, I have to pack all of this information in there, and more about, I want to basically bias them or trick them, for lack of a better word, into what are the things I want to talk about myself. So focus only on those things. Don't rush this question. Don't just try to kind of like, boom, you have 2 minutes now, go, go, go. But be really about saying, I'm somebody who absolutely loves storytelling. And I have done this across these 5 companies. And in company number 1, I learned that storytelling is all about these components. And by the time I got here, I started leading big teams to do that. That to me, just in the next 10 seconds, with maybe a few more numbers, is also a great response to that. Because based off of that, they can then ask you further questions. That is a point of a tell me about yourself question, if that makes sense and helps.
I think it also helps. I always talk to clients about building a thread, which I think is kind of the theme of this entire presentation. But like, if you can encapsulate something about yourself in that 5 seconds of, I've always been very excited about how technology can help people connect. And then you kind of talk about like digitizing the school paper in college, and then being able to use that to work at Meta. and that, you know, like these other things. And this is, you know, kind of where I am at in my career.
Yeah.
But giving them that little snapshot and kind of almost branding yourself really helps. And it doesn't have to be this huge in-depth conversation.
Yeah.
Especially because sometimes all that an interviewer might have is your resume. So you're kind of, like Shiram said, leading the conversation. All right, so we'll wait just a few more minutes for any other questions. I believe that we have answered anything that was left open from before.
I think so too. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, most of the questions have been answered.
Yeah. And then, so make sure that you like and share our presentation with your friends, and help us increase our reach. And we're always happy to chat with you via a profile evaluation or email, whatever questions you might have. And then beyond that, I know that I'll be back on Friday to do a walkthrough of the Texas McCombs MBA application on Friday. So
Nice.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. So if any questions come up, please let us know.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone for attending, and thank you, Jen. Thank you, GMAT Club, for having me.
Thank you.